petition the Speaker to hear my call and that of my fellow compatriots. I support this motion because I love my country and I yearn to see a democratic, ethical and constitutional leadership that truly serves all our people.
But I discovered that you and I drink from the same wells. We've both had great influence and benefit from the Wilgespreet Fellowship Centre, which was founded by Dale White and his wife Trish, which in the 80s was a haven for emergent activists. Tell us a bit about yourself and your background and what Wilgespreet Fellowship did for you.
At the age of, I think, just over 18, I went to a private school in England. I in fact grew up all over Africa. I was born in Nigeria, lived in Nigeria for a while, Ghana for a while. My parents moved to Botswana in 1977, and it was in 1977 that I think I began my political journey, because having grown up in independent African countries, to suddenly be so close to South Africa woke me up. And Botswana, to this little 13-year-old, felt like a kind of paradise. And it was the time of Seretse Khama. Seretse Khama had actually just died, or died soon after I went to live there. And then, of course, news of the murder of Steve Biko. So all of those things kind of came together for me as a young kid to make me think about the world and to make me think particularly about South Africa. So in 1982, between finishing my A-levels and going to university, by some miracle, I don't quite know how it happened, but I got an internship at Wilgespreet Fellowship Centre with Dale and Tish White and the organization's Agency for Industrial Mission, Self-Help Associates for Development Economics. It's interesting how the wheel comes full circle, because I didn't know John's involvement with Wilgespreet, but Bishop Joe Sioka I first met at Wilgespreet in 1982, somebody called Bart Cox, who I got re-encountered in work around HIV. And you know, I went to Wilgespreet as a naive but idealistic little 18-year-old, and what I found at Wilgespreet was a bunch of people whose commitments and passion and integrity just knocked me over completely. You know, Wilgespreet in 1982 was a place, one of the only places in Johannesburg where black people could stay overnight at the conference centre. Dale and Tish worked a lot in Soweto, so I went with them into Soweto to attend churches, to do work in Soweto. And I think, you know, there are certain points that shape your life, and that changed the course of my life. I mean, I probably would have ended up doing something around social justice, but I left that a very different person, and I left it I had to leave it very suddenly, because Dale had been involved in smuggling Cedric Mason out of South Africa. Dale and Tish and myself, as a very kind of small bit part, knowing about the plot. So they had smuggled Cedric Mason out of South Africa, and suddenly there was a lot of police attention on Wilgespreet. And I think the police saw this little white boy with an English accent as easy pickings, so they started to harass me. And I got scared, and so I left and ran back to Botswana with everybody's agreement. But that, you know, that sort of brought to an end 6 months, a very meaningful 6 months, and it brought it to a very, very sharp, sudden end, and it just made me angry, and it made me committed. And I think that was the point at which I became committed to South Africa, in particular, liberation and justice in South Africa.
And I was very fortunate during the election day, you're standing in the queue, to find a friend of yours who had been at school with you in Botswana. She told me that you were a troublemaker for justice even during your high school days.
As I said, Botswana was an interesting place in the late 70s, because it was truly non-racial, and that was what was. It wasn't without class divisions, of course, and I didn't understand the class issues as a kid. But one of the things that had happened in Botswana as part of my waking up, and this is why this person, who I haven't seen for about 30 years, told you that story, was that the centre of white life in Ghana, Nigeria, all these colonial countries, ex-colonial countries, was always the golf club. And I caused turmoil in Botswana society one New Year's Eve when I, at midnight, grabbed the microphone at a party at the Gaborone Golf Club and sang Nkosi Sikeleli Africa and called the caddies to join me. And that was like the sin of all sins. Firstly, the caddies were meant to be outside and not inside, and we sang it together. And secondly, you don't bring politics into these places. So that really made me not a popular person amongst certainly my parents' friends in Botswana.
Well, moving on now to what happened yesterday, I thought we should frame our conversation on Save South Africa with a quote from James Madison. He said in the Federalist Papers, "What is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." What do you think James Madison would say to us today?
Well, look, I think the first thing to say is that, interestingly, struggles of people to control governments and to assert human rights actually begin in precisely that period of the late 1700s. There's two books I would mention which I think are worth everybody reading. The first book is a fantastic book called Bury the Chains, which is written by a chap called Adam Hochschild, who originally actually lived in South Africa, but he's a beautiful writer and documentalist of social justice struggles, from history from the people's perspective. And Bury the Chains is about the struggle against slavery and where the struggle against slavery started. And it's fascinating because it's a fascinating tale because it's, the struggle against slavery started in a printing room with 10 people in about 1787. And what's amazing about that story was the methods that they used, in a world where there was no internet, no post, no electricity, no anything, to build a global movement, literally to build a global movement. It's such a rich story, but it's so relevant today, and it's about people exercising power over government, and it's about people talking to people. But the other book that's related to that is a book called Blessed Unrest, by a guy called Paul Hawken, and its subtitle is How the Largest Social Movement in the World Appeared and Nobody Noticed It, or something like that. And Paul Hawken starts his story with the struggle against slavery. But essentially what Paul Hawken's theory is, which is where I come to Save South Africa and to answer your question, is that, the new power in the world, a power that has been steadily gathering over 100 years or more, is the power of people. And it has to be the power of organized people over their governments that we now have to consolidate. And he literally documents the flow of NGOs and the development of civil society organizations and the development of the environmental justice movement and how that's beginning to merge with the social justice movement. But, I think we've entered a point in not just South African history, but in world history, where instruments by which people sought to advance justice in the past have failed or belong to another age. You know, political parties, for example, are the most obvious example. I think any political party today, once it gets into government, is in danger of being corrupted. It doesn't matter, and that's what's happened to the ANC. It doesn't matter how pure, how committed the forces at play in the world, the capital forces, business forces, criminal forces are such that they will make a play for that government. And unless people organize themselves as a counterforce, then any government will be captured. And, you know, South African government is not the only government captured in the world. You know, the United States government is captured. Barack Obama, I think, is a great man, but hasn't been able to do what he wants. Many governments get captured because people are weak. So people now, I think, and this is a little bit about what Save South Africa is about, have to organize in their churches, in their businesses, in their community organizations, in their sports clubs. People have to take responsibility for their world. You know, if you don't take responsibility for your world now, then your world is going, in this age, our world is going to collapse around us. Middle class people once upon a time could have isolated themselves from society, and they could go and live somewhere and miss the First World War or miss the Second World War or miss this or miss that. Now you can't miss the crises of the 21st century because environmental degradation, climate change, new forms of war, which is essentially what so-called terrorism is, and I don't mean it's not terrorism, but it's a form of war, which don't obey the old rules of war, the so-called rules of war, are going to come into your backyard. So you've got to try and exercise some sort of control over it. So we say you must know your constitution. In South Africa, we are fortunate because we're the most powerful people in the world, really, because of our constitution. Our constitution gives us enormous power. It's the supreme law, It says that our country not just is committed to human rights and democratic values, it says it's committed to social justice. There's hardly another country in the world where the supreme law uses the words social justice. So, you know, John, to get to your question, that's a long-winded way to get to it, but I had to say it. But, you know, Save South Africa it's not a flash in the pan. I think it's part of the growth of our democracy and people's gathering to claim control over our government. And we have pulled it together in the last month, not to be a new political party, not to be a new center of authority where, you know, you must be a member of Save South Africa because we are the people who have the answers. We've pulled it together really to catalyze citizen power and to say, whatever organization, don't wear the flag of Save South Africa, wear the badge of Save South Africa, but stay in your church, stay in your trade union, stay in your Section 27, my organization, or your treatment action campaign. You know, pursue your battles for justice on every front where you're already battling, but recognize that we can't continue working in our silos. We can't continue to be in a fragmented way. We've got to find ways of joining together. And that's what it's about. And at the moment, it's joining together about the fact that we have a corrupt, morally corrupt, politically corrupt president. And lots of people say to us, well, it's not just about Jacob Zuma. It's not just about Jacob Zuma, but the president is the first citizen. The president is the most powerful individual. If your most powerful individual is corrupted, then it's very difficult to get the change that you want and just bypass that. So that's why we're saying openly now, Jacob Zuma must fall. Jacob Zuma must be brought down by legal and democratic and constitutional means. And as somebody said to us yesterday, you're not radical enough, you know, a journalist, you're not, he used the word, you're not extreme enough. And we said, we don't need to be extreme. We said, we are not about burning and looting. We're not. Parts of South Africa, out of frustration, are beginning to think that the only way you can advance a cause is by burning and looting. We're saying, no, that's not true. You've got a lot of power in the constitution. And in fact, what usually happens when you burn and loot is you don't burn and loot the Gupta property. You burn and loot some clinic or some school or some school bus or something. And the people who do it get gratification out of it, and press gets excited, but it doesn't bring about change.
The quote by Madison ends, "A dependence on the people is no doubt the primary control on government, but experience has taught humankind the necessity of auxiliary measures." And how do you see Save South Africa going in that direction for electoral reform?
Well, look, the first thing is we are very clear at this moment. We're not making any grand claims for Save South Africa. At this moment, Save South Africa's focus is on the stepping down of President Zuma and on re-establishing principles of governance that are about integrity and accountability and transparency and constitutionality, as putting those pillars back in the house. That's where we are going with this campaign. We're not promising the world at the moment. But Save South Africa is linked to other organizations, emerging organizations. You know that tomorrow afternoon there's an initiative called Socio-Economic Futures of South Africa, which has been started by Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. They're pulling together 60 people tomorrow for a second meeting to discuss the socio-economic questions. How do we fix the education system? How do we fix the health system for poor people? I'm working with a group of people, Professor Nick Binedell from Gibbs, Moletsi Mbeki, with a small group that are trying to think about alternatives, economic alternatives, because we're focused on the president, but the president's not the only person with culpability. It has to be said that other powers, and particularly other economic powers, business power, has failed us. And I'm personally trying to reach out to influential business people and say there must be other models by which you can run business, which remain profit-making, but make profit in a different type of way. And I often give the example of the pharmaceutical industry, which I've had a lot of fights with. There's two models there. There's the research-based industry, which its approach is set prices as high as you can, because people have to have medicines. If they don't have medicines, they will die, so they will tolerate high prices, and the poor people must just die. Versus generic companies, which set medicine prices very low and get a much larger market with smaller profit margins, but make as large amounts of money. They still make profits. Now, the question I'm asking is, can a similar approach not be found in relation to food retailing? Can a similar approach not be found in relation to medical care? For now, Save South Africa has this particular mission. If Save South Africa succeeds in bringing enough pressure to get us a good president, we will have made people feel power, and we will have taken us to the door of a new beginning in South Africa.
Jacob Zuma will go before his term of office ends. I was predicting that 3 years ago when I was conceptualizing the design of my book cover, which puts him there with Cecil John Rhodes, who also had to resign before his term of office ended over the scandal of the Jameson raid. The reason that Zuma is able to prevail is that his faction controls the state and controls the National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, and then of course we have all the state-owned enterprises. But in terms of the rule of law, which is most concerning to me, because clients of mine have been shot and killed and there's still no prosecution and arrest, is that how do we re-establish the rule of law? Because I fear that South Africa is going to degenerate into grey enemy.
It's a real danger, and that's again why there's urgency. People say, why don't you wait until 2019? We can vote him out of power. Every day counts. Every day damage is being done. if you leave it too late, you're right, you face a disaster. Now, I work in health. I worked through the years of AIDS denialism by the president and by Mantu Shabalala and Nsamang and people. The damage that has been done to the public health system from those years we are still dealing with. And things like that, health systems and education systems, are far more complex to recover than a national prosecuting authority. And that's what I fear, the education system. We're doing more damage to our kids, and I know I'll be shot for saying this, than apartheid did, than apartheid schooling did. If you go in and see the state of our schools, if you take account the fact that half of the schooling population drops out between grade 10 and 12, if you understand the rates of teenage pregnancy, if you understand the rates of sexual abuse of learners, if you understand the drug epidemic that now exists in our schools, of Nyope, of Dacha, if you understand the alcoholism that starts amongst young people, that's where I'm scared. That's where I'm really scared. And that's, again, where I'm saying, I'm not going to say we succeed as Save South Africa. I'm going to say to, and I'm saying to people like Sipho Pichana now, when we're done with this, you're not going back into your comfortable shell. You're going to stay out and you're going to help us to fix these systems. You, Sipho, as Anglo-Ashanti Gold chairperson, you, Adrian Gore, as Discovery Health, you, Cas Kuvadia, as chair of the Banking Council, whoever you may be, you're going to fix this stuff. And it's in your interest to fix it as well, to go back to the point that I made. You can't isolate yourself, You can't. It's coming. It's going to overwhelm you. Riches will no longer buy you security in this world. Total security.
Having worked with Save the Wild Coast, as we originally called ourselves, I was wondering whether there's a possibility that we would change the name from Save South Africa to Sustaining South Africa. The consciousness shift for Wild Coast was, it's not about coming with a messianic rescue, because that's actually what the power holders do. It's about recognizing the latent life forces, protecting them, and allowing them to basically burst forth as your life force burst forth at Wilkesbreed Fellowship with that whole thing.
What you must understand is that in all of these departments, there are very good people still. It's not all our government is corrupt. I said yesterday, and I firmly believe there's many, many more good, honest people in government, in the ANC, than the bad people. It's just that the bad people run the show. We've got to allow the good people to reassert themselves. But if we don't do it with some urgency, John, to answer your question, I think that NPA could probably be fixed quite quickly. I think SARS could probably be fixed quite quickly. The Treasury we're holding on to, and that's what Pravin Gordhan and his team are doing. The other thing that has to be back on the agenda, and it's not necessarily our agenda at the moment, is party political funding. People have raised this issue. Nobody in South Africa knows what they're voting for. No voter. Because they don't know. State capture starts with the capture of the political parties. Who funds the ANC? Who funds the EFF? Who funds the DA? Who funds each one of these parties? If we knew who funded them, then you and me would be able to pick up the disjuncture between what they promise and who are their paymasters. So I think, if you look at the EFF in all its radicalness, who's paying for the EFF? And if you find out that certain businesses are paying for the EFF, and yet this BFF has this anti-business rhetoric, socialist rhetoric, then you have to say, are they serious about their socialist rhetoric? The ANC attacks us, says we have a foreign agenda. Who's paying for the ANC? How much money does the ANC get from China, and for what in return? How much money does the ANC get from the government of India or from Russia? I can tell you, I put my hand on my heart without knowing the facts, that they will get tens and probably hundreds of millions of rands from dubious sources. So there's a whole agenda that we have to get right in this country, that we're going to fix our country.
I mean, we are mostly here, you could say, mature white males, and yeah, as you are too.
Yeah.
But you know what often has, I suppose, has this issue of white privilege thrown at us when we try to engage. What sort of guidance would you have for people like us?
You know, Sipho Pichana said yesterday, labels are going to be thrown and attached to anybody who's perceived as a threat.
There would always be a label that is being used. South Africans must not succumb to that. We must stand for what we believe in, and we must stand our ground. We mustn't be intimidated. We mustn't be harassed. We must stand firm. We do not deserve being led by somebody who is corrupt. We don't.
So you're going to be labelled. I would shake off the label. But you do have to ask yourself questions about yourself and about your own privilege, not to paralyse yourself. But, you know, I think us, as you call it, mature white males, you know, there's things we can do not just in the political sphere, but in our personal spheres, about how we live our lives, about how we use our power, about whether we treat all the people we interact with dignity and with respect, about the little things that can be done to bring about change. But, you know, the issues of race and demographics and gender as well are very, very real issues. And we're very conscious of them, not just in Save South Africa, but certainly all the movements I work in Section 27, in TAG. You know, we white men have got to be party to ending the power of white men in a short period of time, because white men have ruled too long. And there's a criticism where I work, you know, in the social justice sector, that there's too many white men still running the show. We are making a very, very conscious effort with two groups of people, women and young people. If young people don't buy what I'm trying to talk about here, then we're in trouble. If young people think that the methods, this year's methods of fees must fall, of violence and so on, that's not their sort. Let me not mischaracterize it. Some of what we've seen is a way forward, they're wrong. But young people are angry for good reason. You know, 59% of the population in this country are under 30, and they've got nothing. They've got nothing. You know, 60% unemployment amongst youth. It's a living nightmare. You know, I driving here this morning. I'm going to go back and I'm going to write an article. I'm going to take this guy's story, a young guy, probably about 35. He sells the newspapers on the corner of Oxford and Riviera. And I chat to him most days. And I said, Lawrence, where have you been the last few days? I've been not seeing you. No, but the traffic lights have been broken. So I haven't been able to sell as many papers as normal. So the company has sacked me because I can't sell as many papers as normal. So now I'm having to buy papers from other paper sellers to sell papers. This guy travels from Vereeniging every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning to get to that corner. Now, what kind of life is that? You know? For a young, intelligent person who could be doing something. And that's the nightmare. It's a living nightmare. I wrote an article recently saying, you know, you normally think that you want to wake up from nightmares, but most people live nightmares and probably need to go to sleep to get out of their nightmares.
Yeah.
So there's short answer, there's a role for all of us. I think for white men, we just have to be deferential. We have to be humble and also listen and learn. Be ready to listen and learn.